Hey guys, this is Tom from MVP Chess. Welcome back to my series on Bobby Fischer's seminal work, My 60 Memorable Games. In this video, we'll be analyzing game number 15 that Fischer played versus Smyslov in the Candidates Tournament in 1959. You're not going to want to miss Fischer's beatdown of a former world champion. Before we jump in, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and join Team MVP. I really appreciate your support. Okay. So, Smyslov plays e4, and much like we saw in the last game, game number 14 versus Carries, we have a Najdorf on the board and the bishop g5 variation in particular. It's pretty clear to me from seeing these games, especially back-to-back, that the Russian delegation in this tournament really targeted Fischer's Najdorf, and in particular in this bishop g5 variation. So they threw a lot of various novelties at him, but Fischer did an amazing job of responding these over the board and refuting their opening novelties. e6, f4, bishop e7, queen f3, queen c7. We have the exact same tabia position as the Keres game that we looked at last time. Castle's queenside, knight b d7. Okay, so Keres went for this kind of bizarre plan with bishop e2 and ended up sacrificing the queen for a rook, minor piece, and pawn, and Fischer won very convincingly. Smyslov doesn't go for that in this game. He presses on the king side ASAP. Fischer, of course, expands on the queen side. We have a race position, so both sides should be using pawn storms to attack the king. Bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, g5, kicking the knight, knight d7, and in this position, Smyslov played bishop h3, which Fischer really criticized. If you recall, game number 9, where Fischer had a similar position versus Walter, a fairly, as he was called, minor European master. Fischer really got into trouble in that game. And it's centered around his reluctance, for whatever reason, to play the move b4. But he notes in the annotations to this game is, the one thing I learned from the Walter game is that in this position, White should have played a3 here to stop b4, but since Smyslov played a rather dubious move, bishop h3, boom, Fischer played b4. Okay, learning from his mistake in game 9 versus Walter and really seizing the initiative. Okay, this is why it's so important to study your games, so that you can find the mistakes that you made and correct them going forward. So just really model chess improvement by Fischer. I really enjoyed that as a coach. Knight ce2, bishop b7, king b1. Okay, I've said a lot over the course of this series that it's always a good idea to play king b1 when you castle long. And generally speaking, that's true. Fischer really criticized this move. He said this position is just too sharp to afford amenities, he called it, like king b1. Okay, he said Smyslov should have gotten on with his kingside play. Knight c5, knight g3, and I will turn it over to you in this position. Okay, after Fischer's next move, he said the look on Smyslov's face read, "I'm totally busted." So, what strong move did Fischer play in this position to really seize the initiative and take hold over the game? Pause your videos, try to find it. So if you've been watching, if you've been paying attention, this is your pop quiz. Of course, key pawn break that Black is always looking to play under favorable circumstances in the Sicilian is the move d5. Boom! Awesome move by Fischer, okay? Striking back in the center, unleashing this bishop, and Smyslov is in a world of hurt here, okay? Just an absolute world of hurt. He does what any good chess player would do in this position, okay? He looks to complicate matters. He plays pawn f5. And after d takes e4, we see that he's decided to sacrifice a pawn for some activity. So a practical decision by Smyslov here. Queen g4, we have a capture on f5, and then a nice move by Fischer here, pawn to g6. It's a little premature to castle here because there are some problems with these knights coming in very quickly. But Fischer takes a moment here to play this move g6 and exchanges off this potentially dangerous attacking piece. So Fischer is up material here. So every exchange that he's able to make makes this extra pawn loom that much stronger. Okay, it brings us a little bit closer to the end game where this passed pawn is really going to count. But Fischer still has some consolidating to do here. And this is what Smyslov is banking on for his compensation. Queen f4, now Fischer castles, rook d6. Okay, Smyslov looks to activate the rook on the d file, and Fischer brings his rook into the game, offering an exchange of rooks, which, of course, Smyslov declines. He's avoiding swaps, again, to keep the position as complicated and dynamic as he possibly can. So instructive play by Smyslov, if you ever find yourself in this position, down material, whether it's a pawn or a piece or even more, hopefully it's not more than that, but you need to keep pieces on the board. You need to keep things complicated, because if you keep swapping, it just makes the conversion too easy on your opponent. So Fischer activates his rook, bishop g4, knight d7, putting pressure on this rook on f6, rook f1. So Smyslov looking to cash in here on f2. Now you might be thinking, okay, Fischer should take this rook on f6 here, but not so fast, okay? These are the type of complications that Smyslov is hoping for. If the queen were to move here, let's say to d6, please exchange queens. Queen h6 is a big time problem, okay? Fischer would have to give up the queen to stave off mate. Obviously not what he wants in the position. So he can't grab just yet. After rook f1, he pushes his pawn instead. Okay, passed pawns are meant to be pushed. Now this extra pawn is just 2 squares from promotion, so it's becoming very strong. Smyslov gives his king some luft. And then rook d2. One thing that I really learned from Fischer in this position, now it's like chess knowledge that I obviously knew, but to play this game out over the board before I recorded this just really enforced this concept to me. And that is, when you're ahead material, okay, these games can be hard to win. As Emanuel Lasker famously said, the hardest game to win is a one game. What really struck me about this game was how Fischer forced the exchanges he was seeking, not by offering piece exchanges, right? Not by playing passive moves, but by playing active moves, okay? He found forcing moves in this position to put his opponent on the back foot, which left Smyslov no choice but to exchange off these active pieces. Otherwise, his position would be untenable. So just observe how Fischer does this, okay? This knight is getting ready to make some noise, okay? In particular, if, let's say, Smyslov just continues pressing on the king side. Now, this is an honest-to-goodness threat. because queen c5, okay, Fischer has to move the queen, but now this comes with gain of time. That's a key difference. Smyslov doesn't have time for queen h6 in this position because of queen takes c2 with mate to follow. Okay, so that's a great example of once he activated this rook to d2, okay, he forced the exchange he was seeking, but he did so by playing actively. Okay, rook takes d7, rook e1. Fischer, of course, solidifies his precious pass pawn. h4, of course, I mean, what is Smyslov to do other than look for counterplay on the king side? And Fischer plays queen c5, threatening queen c3, okay, which would just be absolutely devastating, taking control over those dark squares, gaining time on this rook that's loose on e1. So what is Smyslov to do? He has to play queen c4. It's basically forced. And here we go again. Okay? Of course, Fischer would have loved earlier to exchange queens, but he couldn't really do so. Now he's looked for forcing moves and has forced his opponent to make the exchanges that he's been seeking. Queen takes c4, b takes c4. Okay? And now, to boot, not only has Fischer got the queens off, but he's managed to inflict damage on Smyslov's queenside pawn structure. And Fischer says he doesn't necessarily like using this cliche, but he said the rest is a matter of technique, as they say. Rook d4, activating the rook. c5. I mean, Smyslov's only counterplay in this position has to do with this passed c-pawn, but Fischer's got it under control. Now he just starts taking all of Smyslov's stuff. c6, bishop c8, nice move. Bringing the bishop to safety, just completely blockading this passed pawn. It's going nowhere fast. Rook d6, rook c4. Fischer gets his rook behind the passed pawn. Really nice. King b2, king g7. Both players look to improve the position of the king, since we're in the endgame. King b3, attacking Fischer's rook, which he moves to g4 with a nice double attack. Knight e2 and rook e6. Okay, here's another exchange opportunity. Okay, Fischer would love to exchange a pair of rooks and get this closer to a rook and pawn, or ideally king and pawn ending, which would just be routinely winning. Fischer maintains the tension. Unfortunately, he can't move the rook and avoid the exchange outright because the pawn on c6 would hang, okay? So what we're talking about, look how Fischer's playing actively and forcing the exchanges, not just offering them and hoping his opponent will take. Smyslov's too good for that. Rook e d1, rook g2. Okay, we can take the rook on d6, but first let's activate the rook on the g file, gain time on the knight. Now and only now Fischer takes on d6. Okay, there goes one set of rooks. Rook d2. Great move by Fischer. Okay, activating the rook and looking to exchange, which, again, Smyslov he's got no choice but to exchange. Now, he finds kind of a cunning move, rook d3. Okay, it's not outright exchanging, but Fischer notes in his annotations that they were both playing pretty fast, and actually this game concluded in kind of the first allotment in time. He said if they were at a point where this position would be adjourned, that Smyslov would have definitely resigned in this position. But they were playing quick enough. They had the momentum. They just kind of kept the game going. So I thought that was kind of interesting commentary by Fischer. Rook f2, attacking the knight. Fischer could have exchanged, but this rook is pretty passive now, and now he's just going to look to push the passer. Rook d4, protecting the knight. e2. Now the pawn is one square away from promotion. Rook d3, knight d3, and then Fischer plays a nice move here. Bishop f5, seeking to undermine the defender of the e1 square. Of course, Fischer's rook's en prise, but that's of no concern to him because he could just promote if this knight were to move. So he can just let the rook hang. C7. Okay, Smyslov, this is his only counterplay, as we've talked about, is this past c-pawn, so you may as well push it and see what happens. And then Fischer plays a nice move here, rook f3. Pinning this knight, looking to play e1 equals queen, which forces Smyslov's hand. Fischer, of course, takes. The rook's able to get behind the pass pawn. But now Fischer's able to, once again, force some exchanges on his terms by playing actively, and now he's in a completely winning rook and pawn ending. And then we have king takes b4 from Smyslov. After rook d5, attacking this pawn, rook g2, I'll turn it over to you in this position. Okay? Black's completely winning, but this is still an instructive position, I think, especially if you're new to rook and pawn endings or you're just looking to improve in general. How does Black win this position? What did Fischer play next? Pause your videos and just think about, what does Black need to do to actually win here? Okay, so congratulations, and for some of you this might be pretty basic, but for others, I hope this is instructive. Fischer has a 3-on-1 majority on the king side. Okay, right now it's being blockaded by this single pawn on g5 and also to the rook on g2 to some extent. So Fischer needs to break the blockade. Okay, and he can do that relatively easily by playing pawn to h6. Really nice move. f6, if you suggested that instead, would also be totally acceptable in this position. So good job if you just recognize that, man, I got a 3-on-1 pawn majority on the king side. I really need to mobilize this and just look to promote these pawns. So that's exactly what Fischer did. After these captures, boom, there we go. Fischer's got connected outside passers that are just going to storm up the board. Okay, rook and pawn endings are drawish, but not when you got passed pawns this strong, not when your rook is really active, cutting off the white king and just splitting Smyslov's position in two. So this is, Fischer could win this game in his sleep. a4, g5, he starts pushing his majority. Rook c2, Smyslov hoping for some sort of counterplay involving rook c6 check, which Fischer just shuts down. Okay, it's not necessarily the best move in this position. You know, perhaps he could have played an a5 check or something like that, but Fischer probably just played this instantly and said, no counterplay for you. I'm not even calculating anything in this position. I'm just going to be really safe. And after king c5, rook e6, Smyslov resigned in this position. His king's cut off. There's no way to stop these pass pawns. So totally understandable decision by the former world champion. And this marked the first occasion that Fischer defeated the former world champion Smyslov. So Smyslov was playing in the Candidates Tournament in 1959 because he had lost the title to Mikhail Botvinnik in 1958. Ultimately, the Candidates Tournament in 1959 was won by Mikhail Tal, who went on to famously defeat Botvinnik in their 1960 World Championship match. So, hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget, join Team MVP. You can do so by just smashing that subscribe button. I really appreciate your support. I will see you next for game number 16. See you then.